Today's webinar is about conceptual estimating, one aspect of our model-based cost estimating solution. And I think that the value of building information models for cost estimating has been recognized generally, especially in the early design phase when it is very important to respond quickly to owners' requests or to design changes. BIM can provide a very good help in helping you to do the quantity takeoffs of the current state of the design. Comparing alternatives is also very helpful by visualizing the conceptual model. You can really see what the status of the project is at a certain point in time. However, the big question is often, how can I use this model, this initial budget that I've established with that conceptual model, in the next design stages? The goal of doing that would be to define an initial budget for your project and use the conceptual model to check your current cost status against. That should help you to keep the project on track. During this webinar, we will show you how that works. First, a little of a theoretic background, and then an actual demonstration to show you how you can achieve that goal. I'd like to start by showing this diagram. Many of the participants in this webinar will have seen this diagram, but maybe in a different form. You may recognize the curves, which often show with the blue line the ability to make changes in the design. The ability to make changes decreases over time, and the red line is the cost impact that possible changes may have. So in the later phases of the project, the cost impact is higher. We changed the label on the vertical axis of this diagram and called that specification level and cost variance. In the early phases of the project, the specification level of the project design is very low. Probably it only exists of a set of requirements from the owner side, asking for a total square footage of office space and a number of parking spaces to be included in the project. Of course, at that point in time, and that could be label number 1, there's a large variance in the ballpark number that you need to give at that point in time. The cost range is very large. Then the next step is to start developing a design together with the owner and the designers, and you make a transition from 1 to 2, make design decisions, and by doing so you can decrease the cost range. Then going from 2 to 3, you develop, say, a schematic design phase set of documentation, design documentation, into construction documentation set. Specification level goes up, and thereby the cost range goes down. At the end, you have all subcontractors on board. Subcontracts have been signed, and therefore the cost range is 0. What we will talk about today is making the transition from Phase 1 to Phase 2. In today's construction world, that transition is often made using paper-based solutions. Each design release finished or is completed by releasing a version of the design documentation. Often that goes that is delivered as a set of paper-based drawings. In some cases, there's also the digital version of those drawings. But the bottom line is that it is non-integrated information. From cost estimating point of view, that set of paper-based information needs to be translated into first a quantity takeoff. So you need to go through the drawings and do a quantity takeoff, and then, often using a computer, calculate the cost of the design intent captured in the set of design documentation. For convenience, that cost estimate is then printed out and put into a binder and brought to the meeting where the initial budget can be presented. As soon as the next design release, and this happens for the entire building at once, which is a difference with what we will explain later during the webinar, the next design iteration, the same thing occurs. So the design information is delivered as drawing set, and then the quantity takeoff is repeated, and the result is also saved in a binder. Going to a meeting, the first thing that is done is look at the bottom line of what the total cost of the project at that point in time is. Of course, it is different than the previous version, so the next 15-30 minutes is typically spent on trying to figure out where the differences between the two cost estimates are. First looking at the estimate, and then start to open the drawings in the drawing set, flipping through the stack of drawings that you have. And the result is that a lot of time is wasted trying to find where the differences between the two design versions are coming from, and why it is that the budget or the cost at that point in time is higher or much lower than expected. During today's webinar, we will show you how to use our technology to integrate the project information. The technology will also help us to compare versions using really the computer to help us identify where the differences are. This will help you to make better decisions, and also to help you, or it will also help you to keep the project on track also after setting the initial budget, so going into the schematic and construction documentation design phases. The technology that we at Vico use to take advantage of the huge amount of quantities that is available from building information models is based on a concept that we call a recipe. And for those of you who haven't been attending any of the previous webinars, I will quickly explain the concept. A recipe is a tag that we link to a piece of geometry in the building information model. The recipe contains a second layer of information, which we call the methods. And the methods are the activities or the phases that an element needs to go through in order to be completed. In this column example, that's placing the reinforcement, putting formwork around it, placing the concrete, and finishing up with cladding materials or paint. There's an optional third layer which can help you to define the cost for labor, equipment, and materials, or if you subcontract an activity, it's going to be the cost of the subcontracted work. For today's demonstration, we will use 4 out of the 6 products in our product range. We will start by looking at a model in Constructor in the top left. And in Constructor, we will tag the elements that we want to use with the recipe information that we just talked about. The quantities extracted from the model will then go into Estimator, where we do the cost calculation. And each version, each status of the project's cost will then go into Cost Manager, which will help us to check the differences between the several versions. Our free viewer application 5D Presenter will help us to identify where in the project the differences between the several versions occur, really showing in the 3D model which elements are responsible for a change in cost. Before I start the actual demonstration, I want to give an outline of the steps that we will go through. The first step is going to be a very conceptual phase of the project, where we only have an outline of the building, basically the building envelope, and we know what the floor levels are. By stacking those floor levels, we can create a schematic or very, very simple representation of the plans that we have for the project. The square footage that we can get out of this type of geometry will help us to do a cost calculation based on square footages for each of the systems that needs to be included in all of the spaces that we've identified. In the next step, we will have made some design decisions, and we'll focus on the residential levels in the building. And we know what the layout of the apartments in those residential levels is going to be. We also know what kind of room finishes we will have, so we can tells something about the cost of those room finishes in the building, and we use the quantities for those specific areas in the building.